Welcome, everybody. Come on in and get settled in. I'm going to be admitting people to the meeting for just another minute or two. So, as we are waiting, would you please go ahead and put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat? And if you're a Harding colleague, we would ask that you put your name and your department in the chat, and I will provide that to CTL after our meeting. Hey, Russ Davidson. It's always so nice to see your name pop up on my screen. I'm still admitting there are still people coming in. We're so glad that you're joining us today. Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Andrea Bishop, and I direct the Center for Leadership and Development at Harding University. And I'm joined today by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Todd Patton, who wears many hats for Harding and outside of Harding. But he's with me today because he's a licensed professional counselor, and I felt like we probably needed that insight for this conversation on loneliness. Thank you, everyone, for putting your name and location in the chat. For those of you who are just joining, we do ask for you to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. Todd, would you like to say hi while we are welcoming a few more people?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and welcome everybody that is here and that people are signing in. I think we're still waiting for a few to admit. We'll probably be admitting a few of them after we start, but that's okay. Um, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. This is something that I think we all can learn from or recognize that it's something that we need to visit about. It's not difficult things, it's not hard things, but it is uh, important to keep in the forefront of our minds.
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd. I feel like after I decided that this would be a good topic for us to talk about, I've just seen loneliness everywhere since deciding that about 4 or 5 months ago. And it's becoming more and more apparent to me that we need to make some changes in our workplace cultures. And hopefully this will be a good conversation to get us started thinking about what we can do as we move forward. So again, I'm Andrea Bishop, and I'm joined with Todd Patton, and we are excited to talk to you about the loneliness epidemic today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you see me fumbling for a moment, it's just because I am admitting people into the meeting. So in May of last year, May of 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, released an official advisory to the nation that highlighted what he described as a public health crisis of loneliness, isolation, and a lack of connectivity in the country. That official publication is an 82-page document that is actually a pretty good read, and it's called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. Throughout the document, Dr. Murthy highlights the damaging health effects of loneliness while also promoting the healing benefits of social connection and community. Essentially, Todd, as you and I both know, loneliness has become this alarming epidemic, I guess is the word that we want to use for the health of our nation, for our churches, for our workplaces. And it's troubling so many of us. Loneliness is all around us. So, Todd, as we were preparing for today, one of your first suggestions was that we should probably start by sharing our goals for our time together. But we also want to start with a shared definition or understanding of loneliness. So, I'm going to share my screen. And, Todd, if you'll walk us through those goals, and then we will move on to our shared definition.
Sure. Thank you. I think today there's a lot of information. We can spend a lot of time on the topic. It's an important topic, um, and it's one that we need to consider. In defining loneliness, we need to also think about what it is, uh, but we need to consider what it isn't. And also, what are the symptoms of some of those things? What are some of the issues that we have related to that? And that brings us to our second goal, the health implications of loneliness, physical health, and also mental health, and uh, systemic health, health in the workplace. As we look at the third one, what does loneliness look like in the workplace? And then finally, um, what might we do? What are some strategies to battle loneliness? Um, yeah, so we'll kind of go through these next few slides and
Okay.
uh, be talking
Yes.
about that.
And for those of you who have just joined, we would love for you to put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat, and we will try to connect with you afterwards, especially if you have questions that we don't have time to answer later on. So let's move to our next slide, which is going to help us um, define what loneliness is. Loneliness is a universal human emotion. So even though sometimes we feel like we're the only ones, it's definitely universal. It's not just us, and it's the state of being lonely. So, Todd, can you help us think through this a little bit more deeply?
It's this feeling of isolation. I think that we're familiar with that at times. This feeling that we're not uh, connected, that we're disconnected from the people around us. So as this says, without company, cut off from others, and it does create these emotions, some of these symptoms, these feelings of sadness, feelings of as we said, isolation, sometimes anxiety. We might even begin to have false messages about ourselves. There's some different emotional feelings. Um, we might lose some hope about the future uh, and what that means for us. So as we as you think about that, you can begin to see how that might affect your everyday life and your workplace. Actually, when we especially we talk about stress and uh, feelings of low self-esteem, um, lack of motivation, and those kinds of things. We all need human contact. We all need to feel connected. And there can be a lot of people around us, but we don't feel connected. Um, we might be communicating, but we're not feeling connected. And so I know you probably had these feelings before, being alone in a crowded room or walking through a large city and feeling alone or even lost. And um, and then there's times when I'm thinking about me being in the woods by myself, or maybe in one of those large cities by myself, when I don't have that feeling of aloneness. I'm feeling more solitude. So it's not so much about not having people next to us or a proximity of people. It's about our being connected with people so that we could be in the hustle and bustle of our workplace and not be feeling connected and feel quite alone, even though there might be a lot of people around us, might be a lot of activity around us, and there might be a lot of communication around us. We also have these feelings of sorrow due to separation of loved ones. So we also have grief that is included there, and and that might lead us to some other conversations, but definitely that's part of that. And this feelings we need to be needed, so we might have these feelings of being abandoned or neglected at times. So it's really important that we're identifying what our needs are and trying to meet those needs in the workplace, because in the workplace That's a large part of our life. And even though the workplace isn't always a place where all needs need to be met, some needs need to be met there. And we need to take effort to try to meet our needs in other places um, as well. But as I was saying about loneliness and or solitude, um, this is something. Solitude is a little bit different, and it's something that we really need to be practicing. Um, but again, loneliness is marked by feelings of isolation, despite wanting or actually needing social connection. We might think that we don't have a lot of control, or it's involuntary, or we might feel rejected or abandoned by others. But solitude is different. Solitude is voluntary. And sometimes different people, or us at different times, enjoy solitude, and it helps with social relationships. And we can be in solitude and kind of rest and rejuvenate and have that Sabbath, but also then kind of make sure that that can help us meet our needs in connection. We still spend time with others, but we balance that with times of solitude. And I don't know how good we are at that. I'm not so good at that. Me and Clay Beeson is on here. Uh, he's attending today. We've talked about this recently, that we might need to practice some of that solitude, like leaving our phones away, not looking at those things, but really spending time with ourselves, connecting with ourselves, enjoying our own company.
Right.
Yesterday was a difficult day. It was a busy day. It was crammed, and some of it was emotional. And I spent some time last night. I built a fire in the driveway with a fire pit. It wasn't just like a fire in the driveway, but sat in a chair and just ate my dinner out there and relaxed by myself. And uh, it does wonders. So solitude is different than loneliness, and it doesn't always have to do with proximity,
Right.
but it's something
Um,
you might want to
yes.
practice.
I mean, I think that I often need those moments of solitude for creativity. Like when I'm surrounded by chaos, that creative
Exactly.
part of me is really stifled. So I need some retreat time for creative moments. But one other thing I wanted to comment on before we move on is that I think sometimes we don't use the language of loneliness. I don't know that I've ever said I'm lonely. But I definitely do say things like, I don't feel connected. I've said that about church very recently. I feel disconnected from my church family. I've said that. I've said, Todd, I've said to you, I don't feel like anyone at work really understands what I do. And that's not me saying I'm lonely, but I do think that those are loneliness statements that especially leaders need to be listening for and trying to solve for the people that they are in charge of. So we need to
Really
start
good.
listening more intently for those statements that don't say lonely, but actually mean lonely, I think. Let's go ahead and take a minute to get back to that public health crisis of loneliness again. And I want to just review briefly what our Surgeon General shared about the health concerns related to loneliness. So, Murthy's advisory shed light on what he called an underappreciated public health crisis that has harmed individual and societal health. In fact, this is crazy, but one study found that the health impact of loneliness is comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, which is rather shocking to me. Murthy's research crosses all disciplines and populations. So, from young to old, from rich to poor, from leaders or more seasoned workers to those who are new to the workforce. The overwhelming takeaway, the thing that we must remember, is that we have to start treating loneliness with the same concern and weightiness that we treat other public health issues, such as smoking or substance abuse. There are too many physical health consequences for us to ignore. So let's look at some of those. There's a 29% increased risk of heart disease associated with loneliness. There's a 32% increased risk of stroke, 50% increased risk of developing dementia, and more than 60% increased risk of premature death are all linked to loneliness. It truly impacts all generations, genders, socioeconomic statuses, races, and geographical locations. And even before the COVID-19 pandemic, almost 50% of adults in America reported experiencing loneliness. And of course, that hasn't necessarily gone away. Even when the pandemic sort of magnified those numbers, our daily lives, while they've returned to, I don't know, normal, the loneliness numbers have remained extremely high. So who suffers from loneliness? Seriously, it's basically everyone. And by that I do mean everyone. Some age groups suffer from loneliness a little bit more than others, but all groups report very high percentages of loneliness. And while those percentages may vary across the hundreds of research studies that are out there conducted on loneliness, all studies agree that our younger generations, so our new employees, our children, are reporting feelings of loneliness much more frequently than our older generations. Research specifically on loneliness in the workplace rather than loneliness at home or in other places has found that 80% of Generation Z and 70% of millennials consider themselves lonely at work, while about 50% of baby boomers are expressing those same feelings. For my generation of Gen X women, especially women who hold leadership roles or who work in male-dominated fields, loneliness is at an all-time high. It's kind of off the charts. So Todd, all of those demographics are pretty alarming, but I feel like there's more to that. What are we missing when we talk about those numbers?
Well, there's a lot. One thing I would say is, we're talking about all these different kinds of people. All people have different needs, and so their solutions to overcome loneliness will be a little bit different. And so it's important for us to look at symptoms. There's some things there. You talk about the cognitive withdrawal. That is definitely uh, something. We have difficulty concentrating, lack of motivation, as I said already, isolation and feelings of emptiness, maybe increased irritability, self-talk, negative self-talk, low self-esteem. We'll see behavior indicators of people being withdrawing. We'll see reduced productivity in the workplace because of these things. So it's really important that leaders really consider this, and in fact, all of us consider this. We realized that with different symptoms, we had different solutions, and with different people, there's different needs. So I think as we talk about what are some of the strategies, we're just kind of have to take a shotgun approach in all these opportunities and kind of practice the way that we think about these things. Um, I would say, again, repeating that communicating isn't connecting. It's important that we connect. Our president here, Dr. Burks, over when he was president, always talked about camaraderie and how important that was. Even today in our leadership meeting, we were talking about what can we do to enjoy one another in the workplace. Put some puzzles in the break room. How can we draw people into the break room? What kinds of activities do we need to do? Where is it that we can have fun and maybe connect in a different way? So I think that's important as we look at connecting and different strategies.
Yeah, Todd, I think that there's something there about technology. Technology has a lot of agency in this loneliness discussion because I feel like, well, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit on what we talked about, Todd, but almost half of us in the workplace rely exclusively on email to communicate with our teams. So, like you were saying, we may be communicating, but that doesn't mean that we are connecting. So, if half of us are communicating exclusively with email, almost half of that half say that they are extremely lonely in the workplace. And I just feel like there's got to be a connection there. I mean, if we're not engaged, it's because we're not connecting. So maybe it's that lack of personal interaction, the lack of face-to-face conversations, the prioritizing of being efficient. Like we've become so efficient that we've lost the personal connections at work, which I think is problematic. So,
There
however,
was a time when we go
go ahead.
home and the phone was on the wall and you left work and all the lights are out and you couldn't do work and every between programs during commercials or something like that. And we're even with our own families and not being connected.
Yeah,
um,
that's
my kids have even called me a screenager as I'm on my phone in the living room.
right.
uh,
I know. I
it's
know.
important to think about. There's been some positives and there's been some negatives with that, and of course COVID has propelled that to even more of a problem where we uh, continue to still uh, be disconnected from that event because we do more on Zoom. I have a meeting later today that all the people are in this building, but we're doing on Zoom because it's easier to share documents and things like that. So we have to really pay attention to
Right.
some of
So
that,
that
and that's
efficiency. Yeah. Yes. Um, that's something that we should probably be thinking about more is what are we losing when we focus on efficiency? So, okay, so there are some good news. There's good news. It's not all bad news. According to the Surgeon General, developing healthier relationships can provide sources of healing and well being with the potential to help us live healthier and more fulfilled, productive lives. So, our Surgeon General stated that solving our loneliness epidemic is as straightforward, not easy, but as straightforward as taking steps every day to strengthen our relationships, to build social connections, and to generally reinvest in community engagement. I recently read this book by Susan Metz, who is a Christian behavioral scientist. And so she has approached the loneliness epidemic through a Christian worldview. And she provided this really wonderful metaphor that I am very fond of. So I wanted to introduce this today. She says that protecting against loneliness is often, it just comes down to these three very specific elements: belonging, closeness, and reasonable expectations. So she says that when a three-legged stool, so just picture a relationship as a three-legged stool, when all three legs have the exact same length and they're resting on a firm, even foundation, the user can sit comfortably on that stool. That stool can handle a lot of weight, right? Um, so each of those legs, we've got belonging, we've got closeness, and we've got reasonable expectations. When we're resting on those equal amounts of each of those items, then our relationships are fulfilling. Okay. But if we shorten one of those legs, say we shorten our sense of closeness with a friend or with a spouse, then it takes a lot more work and much stronger abs to continue to sit on that stool. Sorry. If we shorten two of those legs, maybe we have unreasonable expectations and not much closeness, then that does not bode well at all for the person trying to sit on the stool. Pod last weekend, or actually 2 weekends ago, I spoke at a women's retreat and I shared this idea, the three-legged stool. And one of the comments afterwards, what came from a woman who said she wants her three-legged stool with her husband to be like counter height and really comfy and to have like a nice cushy seat. And she never ever wants to have to put a napkin underneath one of those legs, which I thought was a very useful, helpful idea for me because I think that gives us permission to think about our relationships as different height stools, right? We don't have to have 25 counter height relationships. We can have some that aren't that tall or aren't that deep. So, what are your thoughts on that? How can we adjust our stool heights with our relationships that we already have?
I like this leg three, having reasonable expectations of us and expectations of those around us. Now, there are some things that have happened to us in the past that make it more difficult for us to trust in a relationship, or it makes us crave being connected more than normal. And so we do need to be working on some of those things, and try to have diff I think have a variety of different kinds of relationships, um, and in order to meet those many needs, not just depend on a few uh, people to meet all of
Mhm.
those needs. It can be very difficult, um, and make sure that those expectations are shared between this other person in the relationship. I want to go back to. I mean, it has to do with this, but this idea of trust, when we're talking about this communicating but not connecting, we're not able then to trust, and really that's the biggest part of this relationship, having a trusting relationship. I even said something like this earlier this week, and I wasn't thinking about this particular thing, but I would go to battle with someone I trust. I would rather go alone, instead of having somebody with me that I don't trust. Not that I have a problem with, but I haven't learned to trust.
Right.
And I think a lot of us in the battles of our everyday, because we don't trust people, might choose the easy path of being alone to do work, to do projects, to do things. And it is kind of a vicious cycle of um, not choosing to connect because of lack of trust, and then not connecting and creating that trust. And all of that has to do with this relationship, and I think that three-legged stool that you mentioned.
Thank you, Todd. I also read recently about this disconnect between what our executives or leaders believe and then what their employees actually believe, which I think kind of goes into what we're talking about here. But 50% of executives believe that their employees feel like what they are doing at work is important, but only 30 to 35% of employees actually believe that. And so the idea of the mission, a mission fit, is important. And I think that sometimes as leaders, we assume that those who work under us understand our mission. And we need to stop assuming that. And we need to make sure that the mission actually is shared and communicated and connected to what we do each and every day. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say that's important, that it is shared and communicated. And sometimes the mission is shared and communicated, but it's not acted out on a daily basis. It's really not it's what they wish the mission would be.
Right.
And
Right.
so that can cause some issues with people in regards to feeling connected and belonging to this organization and about where they're going. So I think leaders in general, we need to find ways to build relationships within the workplace, relationships with us and as leaders and employees, other employees and other leaders, but also everyone amongst themselves. Where can
Mm,
we do some networking? And really, we're kind of preaching to the choir right now because you all are doing the very thing. Some of the things that you would need to do to be connected. I know that we're on Zoom, but it is something that is engaging in something different. You didn't have to do this, but you're choosing to do this. So events, seminars are important. Building relationships, seeking support, uh, social activities at work. I think that are important. I go to a workplace here in town maybe once a quarter and do lunch and learn with them, and I've I've really grown to connect with them, and they connect with each other, and they go to events together. They have their Christmas parties. They're really tight in their community, and it's really uh, good to see. And actually, I feel like I'm part of their group. In I would say this may be a bad word, uh, but I'll say committees. Join committees or groups or or collaborate on projects. Maybe ones that you might not normally do, or with people that you might not normally work with.
right.
Those things are helpful. Take breaks together. Uh, and I would
Yeah.
say this: as far our responsibility is be approachable. Um, be be someone that people will want to be around, be sweet and warm and those types of things. I have a tendency, I think I'm approachable, but also have a tendency to maybe share a behavior that is not very approachable. And that's a flaw that I have where I'm in my mind walking around the front lawn or around the halls, moving quickly to one thing or another, and I'm in my head and not in the present moment. Not I need to be working on that because that could um, create these opportunities for more loneliness and it reduce my opportunities for connecting.
Right. You said the word committee, so I wanted to throw this out. But after that women's retreat from church a couple of weeks ago, several of the women put together what we're calling a connectedness committee, which is kind of funny. But the pri the prime goal is to put together events that are low key, low stakes,
Yeah,
invitation for everyone, where we don't have to clean our house or bake something or read a book before we show up or be prepared to answer questions. We just have to show up and, go if we can. But we also talked a lot about not getting our feelings hurt if we invite someone to do something and they can't join us. And I think I mean, I know that I'm absolutely guilty of this. I've invited people and they can't join me and so they say no and then I just never invite them again. Like I'm like, well, that one's over. That relationship is done, which is ridiculous of me because I know how busy I am. And so I think that we just need to give a lot more grace to people and be willing to ask and get a no every once in a while. I think that that's entirely fair. So I think this is our last slide, Todd. And it kind of wraps up what you've already talked about, those feelings of trust, of being valued in the workplace, of company culture, but also, ooh, those internal policies and politics can really trick people up. And uh, that often becomes a problem with feeling connected at work or those feelings of loneliness. Do you want to add anything to that?
the one that stands out to me, of course, I'm a counselor. Is this feeling of being undervalued. And when we feel lonely, what messages are we hearing? We might be hearing, "I'm not worth it. I'm not valued. Um, I don't have what it takes." There's a lot of messages there that we could take that are that are false, but reinforcing. And so I think we need to really make sure that we identify that feeling and really test that feeling for accuracy. Because we're not invited to the party, or because that we didn't do this sort of thing, doesn't necessarily mean that we're not worth something. And those feelings of loneliness and isolation and emptiness, self-worth, self-esteem, those can happen because of this not feeling connected. And the
Right.
recipe, the medicine, is feeling connected. And we do have some responsibility in that, like as you said, um, in leaders or policies and ideas, like we discussed in my earlier leadership, you know, meeting about what kinds of things can we do to get us around the table that's not work related. And some things are actually work related,
Right.
but feeling connected, it builds morale.
Right. And you and I have both talked about, um, when food is involved, people generally are more, amiable and connected. And so
Yeah,
even, even if it's a work meeting, if we can introduce some snacks and have time to talk before the meeting gets started, I think that that really helps build those connections. So Todd, I want to make sure that we are leaving plenty of time at the end to take some questions or comments from our participants. And I know you want to walk us through an exercise. So
yeah.
I'm going to put an image on the screen and let you do that, and then we will wrap things up.
As we said, sometimes these things that we can do are very small. Uh, uh, Food and small things that says that you're worth time and energy. um, that we do for others that shows appreciation, but we also need to be thinking about this and our part of that dance in connecting with others. But that disconnection does bring about these feelings of low self-esteem, self-worth, loneliness, emptiness, and we are in need of that nurture. So I want to guide us in this guided imagery for a couple of moments. Um, I know it seems kind of strange and unfamiliar, but I'm going to ask that you just go with it, just participate if you can, and where you're at, if you're able to, if you would just find a comfortable seat and a comfortable position. If you can turn some lights out, that might be helpful. This won't take very long. But get comfortable, close your eyes, and take a deep breath. And as you breathe in, you allow yourself to fully relax. And as you exhale, you let go of tension. You let go of stress that you may be holding on to. So we breathe in and we breathe out. Imagine the sun shining through the forest, and you find yourself standing on the edge of a calm, tranquil lake. The water is clear, warm, inviting. You breathe in as you take it in. You see the sun reflecting gentle light on the water and you feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, soothing and comforting. You feel the water at your feet. Breathe in, rest and relaxation. You breathe out tension, stress. You step into the water and you feel it envelop you, wrapping you in its gentle embrace. And with each step, you feel a sense of weightlessness as it's lifting you. It washes over you, still feeling the sun on your neck. It's as if the water is lifting you away from burdens or worries that you might be carrying. Breathe in, you breathe out tension, and as you wade deeper into the lake, you feel a sense of calm and peace, serenity washing over you. You're surrounded by the gentle rhythm of the water. It's soothing. Its presence comforts you. It soaks into you. And with each breath, you imagine yourself letting go of negative thoughts, feelings that you have about yourself, as if they're words coming off of you and floating onto the water and cracking and dissolving deep into the depths. You feel the warmth of the sun and you feel this release of doubts or insecurities. You're allowing those words, those feelings to dissolve into the waters all around you. As you're being fed these feelings of connection, you immerse yourself in the waters and you feel this connection growing within you. You're not alone. You're part of something greater. You're connected to the world around you in ways that you don't fully understand, but you trust. And you feel a sense of worthiness. You feel some power, self-esteem blossoming within you, as if it's reaching for the sun and you feel its warmth. You believe that you are worthy of love and belonging. So you take a moment to bask in this feeling of self-worth and acceptance, in this present moment. Breathing, allowing yourself to be nurtured by the healing waters surrounding you, replenishing you, feeding you, restoring your spirit, your sense of wholeness. And you realize that you're truly never alone. You're surrounded by love and support, both within yourself and from the world around you and the others that you know. You breathe in and you breathe out. Feeling this feeling. In which with each breath you feel more certain about the love that surrounds you. So when you're ready, bring yourself back to this current moment. Slowly wake your fingers and toes, taking a deep breath, and gently open your eyes. And I pray that you're able to carry this sense of strength and connection with you as you go to your day, knowing that you're worthy of love and that you are loved by God and by others, and that you are worthy to be happy and have happiness, all the happiness that life has to offer.
Thank you, Todd. And for those of you who may not know Todd very well, this is why I keep him around. He's pretty useful. That was exactly what I needed. I've had a very stressful morning, and that was wonderful. So thank you for walking us through that exercise. We have um, enough time to take your questions or comments. For privacy, we're going to keep your screens off, but if you would like to engage with us, please use the chat to send us your question. And if you don't have a question, we would love to know a takeaway from today, something that you learned or something that you want to think about a little bit more fully, something that you want to take back to your office and talk about with your colleagues. Please share that with us so that we can learn from you and also to help us think through what we might be able to do in another webinar. So we would love for you to use the chat for that. And while you're doing that, Todd and I will talk for a couple of minutes and try to monitor the chat while you are adding your comments and questions. Russ Davidson has said there's been a lot of news lately regarding diversity and inclusion in offices and departments, etc. And he read a good article recently that suggested we change the name of those departments to include the word connection. So maybe as simple as the Office of Connection, which I kind of love. What do you think, Todd?
I love that. That's a great idea. And that's something we really could have spent more time on, this diversity and inclusion. Think about that word, inclusion. There's groups of people, um, and maybe we all are at times, but that feel alone in a certain place or in a certain culture. And so I think that's a really important conversation to have. I appreciate that being brought up.
Thank you, Russ. And Clay has said, take me back to that lake, and I'm going to I'm going to second that nomination, and maybe we could get just a faculty-wide retreat to a lake for some connecting making. Mark Fager, thank you. He was amazed that loneliness is equivalent to 16 cigarettes a day. Me too. That's crazy. And Sean Spearman, thank you so much for being here. So this is what's working in Sean's position: weekly video meeting with his boss to catch up, which is a great idea, especially those one-on-ones, I think are very helpful. And then visiting campus several times a year is also needed, and it provides those connections. Agreed. I work almost exclusively remotely and go to campus 2, 3 times a month, and those campus visits are very good for my soul. So, um, Jay Simpson said, we've gone through the entire session without using the word flourishing, which is a word that we're hearing a lot at Harding, but that might be a new one for you if you're not from our Harding community. And so the idea of helping our employees, helping those who report to us flourish in their work is an important thing to think about as we're talking about connections and battling those feelings of loneliness. We would love to
I
comment on
thought about it,
anything
Jay.
else. Go ahead.
Jay, I thought about that word, but I didn't get it out. So should have flourishing there. Got it.
Thank you. Maybe I think we've just heard it so much that we were trying to find synonyms for it.
Hmm.
So I have been thinking about loneliness in preparation for this webinar for about 2 months. And I feel like, when you are thinking about something, you see it everywhere. It pops up in your news feed. You notice people talking about it around you. And I was in the grocery store yesterday, Todd, standing in line behind someone who was on the telephone, as you know, we do. And she was saying things about feeling disconnected, about um it sounded like she was talking to somebody who wasn't her husband. I don't know. I was totally just, peeping in,
Oh,
but she kept saying, um, he's not listening, he doesn't hear me. Um, we haven't had any connection lately. And those are loneliness conversations that are all around us all the time that we need to be paying more attention to, whether that's at work or in our personal lives or in our church families. Thank you, Andrea Morris. I'm so glad you were with us today. Naming the challenge is the beginning of recognizing and understanding it, and it removes potential shame. Absolutely. There was one other thing that the Susan Metz book put me on to that I didn't share. So that was the book that was written about loneliness from the Christian perspective. And she included crazy ideas, I thought. Some surveys of Christians specifically indicated that they felt shame or embarrassment if they felt lonely at all. And I think that that is a little bit heartbreaking. If Christians feel like they can't talk to other Christians about feeling lonely, then we're doing something wrong in the church, but also church adjacent places like Harding University. You have any thoughts on that, Todd?
no, I think I don't know. There are a lot of thoughts on that I have. I know we only have a few minutes left, but sometimes one of the places I feel most alone is at church,
Mm,
especially after church, walking in, walking out and some of that is again me not connecting and people not connecting with me. I'm afraid. I think we're sometimes afraid to show our true selves in that space with
yeah.
everyone.
Yes. Agreed. Absolutely. We'll take this comment from Jay and then we'll start to wrap up. So, another aspect of leadership as it pertains to loneliness is having to make difficult decisions that affect other people. Oh my goodness, yes. But those
Wow.
decisions have to be made for the good of the organization. And so the decision maker must feel lonely in those situations. Agreed. But I think that the recipients of those decisions also must experience feelings of loneliness, that those are difficult times. And the only thing I can go back to as far as leadership knowledge is that conversations and connections need to be had at all times so that when those difficult decisions come down, it's not a surprise. It should never be a shocking surprise. We should be telegraphing things well in advance before any decisions are made. So, Todd, you want to wrap us up and then we'll close
Yeah,
out?
I would say too. Jay made me think of this, and that I think it's important for us to find people that in other organizations that kind of do what we do, that we can kind of have a retreat together or help understand our particular issues together. I know in working in a job like this or where I was directing a children's home before, other directors of children's homes understood some of the things. We understood only things that were related to what we did, and that um, it felt really good to be able to be heard and understood by somebody in the same uh, type of job. So I think that might be something that that we could do. I think thinking about this as far as ourselves are concerned and what our needs are, and then what our needs of our organization, bring this before your group. Talk to them because people have their own specific needs. Don't make assumptions about what people would want, but go ahead and use this seminar as an opportunity to further the discussion with the people that you work with.
Yeah. And my challenge to everyone is to develop your own connectedness committee in your department and wherever you work, wherever you are from. And it could just be that you're the starting point for something that becomes a beautiful wildflower that just like sweeps through. So I hope that for you. And we just encourage you to work on making connections today and this week and throughout the year. Thank you so much for joining us today. What a gift to be able to talk about something that is this important. So thank you, Todd. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We are going to stop the recording now and send you on your way. Bye, everybody.